Hello, this is Russell Moore, and you're listening to The Russell Moore Show, brought to you by the Christianity Today Public Theology Project. Every week, we explore questions and conversations from a Christian perspective. And this week, I am here at the Chapter House at the Warren with my friend Andrew Peterson, who has just written just published his new book, The God of the Garden. And we were supposed to do this at my house. Mm-hmm. And then the more I thought about it as of yesterday, I live in one of the soulless suburbs, just 5 minutes down the road, but one of the soulless suburbs that you blast in the book. And I thought it would be better to be here because there's a lot, and we'll get into it later, but a lot about this particular house and that view right out the window where we are right now in the book.
Yeah.
And so thanks for letting us be here.
Yeah, it's nice to have you back.
You know, another reason why I'm glad to be here is because this place has been a haven for me at some of the craziest times and other times, but some of the craziest times to be here and just hang out and talk about normal things when there are abnormal things going on, and during COVID, outside, and so forth. That's just a blessing. And when I was thinking about the things I'm most grateful for over the past 18 months, COVID, that was a big part of it. So it's cool to be here.
That's awesome. Me too. One of my favorite. I don't know what it is about me, but like I'm fairly introverted. And so big groups, I can do it. I can handle it. I have a good time. But 3 or 4 friends sitting in a circle, talking, I could be there for hours. It is so life-giving to me. And we have spent many hours in this place that it feels like such a haven to me. And there's this C.S. Lewis quote I just read where he was like, is there anything more pleasurable than Christian friends by a fire or something like that. I forget the quote, but I immediately thought of the nights that we've hung out in here and had like long rambly conversations that aren't about, it's not like we're sitting here, they're not beard strokey conversations, Sometimes it is, but usually it's just laughter, you know? Sometimes it's tears, but I really treasure those nights. It's really good for me.
When you were, I had to laugh as I was rereading The God of the Garden because I was thinking about, it was odd to be reading this while knowing this place. And at several points I just said, this really does get at something key to AP. And part of that is you talk about in this book, and we'll talk about in a few minutes what the book is about.
Sure.
But you talk about in this book the need for rootedness and the need to have a place to come home to when you're on the road all the time. And I mean, while we're recording this right now, you're leaving to continue the Behold the Lamb of God tour that you do every year around the Christmas season tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
So I was thinking as I was reading that there are a lot of our listeners who are musicians or truck drivers or traveling sales representatives and whatever, and they're out on the road a lot.
Yeah.
How do you do that without it just wearing you down and disconnecting you?
Well, it does wear me down. I'm super tired right now. I took 2 days ago we were on the road, and it was the last show of I think from the time the tour started until yesterday we had 1 day off, like after Thanksgiving. And so I'm 47 now, and I feel it in my body in a way that I didn't used to. And I took 2 naps one afternoon, which is really weird for me. So yes, it does wear me out, but I think it's a lesson we learned back early on in my music career. my wife and I, we were kind of like committed to doing this thing together. She was a background singer, so it was me and her and my buddy Gabe on the road. And then when she got pregnant with our first one, 2 weeks after his birth, he was back on the road with us, sleeping out of it. Aiden was literally sleeping in our suitcase. We would take the clothes out and make a little, manger for him. And so we were doing that. It was probably 5 years of doing that. I think at the peak of our travel, we were gone 9 months one year. And, our marriage had a hard season in the middle of that. And when we came home and needed to like recover, we realized we didn't have any community. We were like disconnected from our church. We felt like there were very few people in Nashville that we felt safe enough to like talk through what was going on. And that was like this huge, like, red light started flashing for both of us. We're like, this is not how this is supposed to be. We've actually counseled quite a few younger artists who are married, like, hey, you should really think hard about only one of you being out at a time.
Yeah.
Because there has to be some kind of connectedness to a local church, some group of people that know what's going on in your life, that can pray for you when you're gone, that welcome you back with open arms when you get home, or it's just not going to work.
It's funny you say that, because I have talked to in recent days several musicians who are Christians who are right at the edge of losing their faith. And I'm curious to know why you think that. I mean, at any point, everyone's always struggling and fighting, but right now, there seems to be much more than usual. Musicians sort of, I feel like I'm deconstructing. And what they mean by that is sort of the furthest edge of that.
Right.
And I wonder why. Do you think it's the being disconnected from a church community, being on the road all the time, or is there just something unique about this time that's especially hard?
Man, I'm as mystified as anyone about it all. I think it's tricky. First of all, I just don't like the word deconstruction.
Nor do I. But
because I feel like that deconstruction can be a really good, beautiful thing,
Yeah.
But deconstruction implies like a responsible, careful thinking through of this structure. But the real issue I have with it is that Christianity is not a construct.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can't deconstruct the person of Jesus.
But some forms of Christianity have become a construct.
Right.
Yeah.
So when somebody talks about Christianity in those terms, I kind of am like, where's Jesus? Like he inhabits this house that you're talking about, or he's supposed to.
Yeah.
And so as for artists that are dealing with it, maybe it's that. Maybe it's that there's a little bit of disconnectedness from a local church, but it's also artists tend to live at the edge of things. They part of what there's like can be a prophetic kind of voice that it requires this exploration of the in-betweens, but I also think that if you're a Christian and you're an artist, that comes built into that is a real sense of intention and purpose. You know what I mean? It's like I've never felt comfortable. It's kind of like somebody being in the International Space Station. Sometimes you've got to climb outside of the thing, but you're always going to be tethered to the space station because you know that's your life source. So in that analogy, I don't know that I think a lot of people have forgotten that the real source of their life is this church, right? Yeah. And so that's a theory. I don't know. I'm kind of speaking off the top of my head, but I do feel like it makes me think of Father Thomas McKenzie, who died this year, my dear friend. I remember him talking about, we may have talked about this before, when he was young, he used to think doubting was cool. And he said that the older he's gotten, the more he's realized that there's a faithful doubting and an unfaithful doubting. And I think the key is to faithfully doubt. Like if you're going to ask questions, do it from a posture of wrestling with the angel, not turning away from it.
I just saw one of his parishioners had put up on social media, I think, about when he was going through this time when this parishioner was going through this time of intense doubt. And it something along the lines of this. He told Thomas, I'm afraid I don't believe in God right now. And Thomas said, okay, well, let's just say you're not going to believe in God right now, but you're going to show up. And I just have confidence enough in word and sacrament that we can get you through that.
Yeah.
And this person was saying that's exactly what happened. I mean, it doesn't happen with everybody, but it happened with him.
Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to Ian Cron about this one time. I told him I was confessing some sin and no, what was it? It doesn't matter. Like I was talking to Ian about something and he pointed out that every time he sins, he's disbelieving in God. Mm. And there's a sense in which that's true. Like, I mean, every time I choose the wrong thing, it's because at its heart, arguably, it's because I've stopped believing that God really is who he says he is, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's my thing is I kind of want to be like, everybody doubts. We doubt all the time. And it's not as binary as I think that people make it sound. That you can be a full Christian and have 15 doubts a day, you know?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who, because we only know ourselves from the inside out, you assume that everybody else is living a completely different sort of Christian life, that people are just, I mean, we know cognitively that everybody's a sinner, but you tend to think, well, everybody else just has this kind of singing hymns to themselves all the time sort of mentality. And so something's wrong.
Right. That's also a very Enneagram 4 way of doing it.
It is, yeah. I know.
Which we both are.
Yeah, we both
are.
Yeah.
That feeling that like there's something wrong with me that isn't wrong with everybody else.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
True.
I carry that with me everywhere I go.
Yeah. So maybe what I'm saying is most people don't do that. And so maybe I'm projecting that onto other people.
Well, I do it. So, hey, that's why you're welcome to the chapter house.
You know, you were talking in the book, The God of the Garden, about seeking solitude without disconnection.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of points in the book where I said to myself, well, it was really similar. One of the things I treasure you gave to me recently is a first edition of C.S. Lewis's Four Loves. Mm. And what I treasure about it most is the inscription that says, "You too, I thought I was the only one," that you wrote in there. Because, of course, that's what Lewis says friendship is. And you too, I thought I was the only one. And I was laughing at some points because I went through the book, how similar some aspects of our childhoods were, even though I was in coastal Mississippi, you were first in Illinois and then in Florida. For instance, I had I called it my secret thinking place.
No way.
It was it was right in the middle of a kind of swampy area out in the woods with some trees that had fallen down from a hurricane long ago. It was a secret thinking place. You talk about in the book having this sort of refuge in
thinking tree.
Nature. Thinking tree.
Yeah. The thinking tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
just crazy to me.
Yeah.
The thinking tree was this. The cool thing about that in the book was that I had forgotten completely about the thinking tree until I went home to Illinois, to my hometown a few years ago. And while I was walking through the town, I was texting my parents stuff. I was like, "Hey, I'm standing here. What do you remember about this place?" And all of a sudden I was like, did our family used to cross the street to the park and sit around a tree? What a weird thing. It's like this druidic thing, you know? Yeah. I was like, what were we doing? I texted my mom and dad and they were like, oh, we would go there and read together. We would read stories. We called it the thinking tree. And my mom said, your dad used to go there alone to pray. He would sit at the base of this tree to pray when he was working on a sermon or whatever. And I didn't know that, but it means that as a child, I would have seen my dad go to be alone and sit at the base of a tree and work out his sermons or whatever. And they said that then the real nugget was when my mom texted and said, I remember you used to always ask us if you could go to the thinking tree by yourself. And we would always tell you to look out for traffic on State Street. And it was a memory that was completely gone from me, but it unlocked something in me. I was like, oh man, I've always felt a kind of peace, communion with God when I'm away from things, when I'm close to home, but I'm far enough out to where I can feel like I'm in a secret place, like you were talking about.
Yeah. And for me, it was also stars. because walking at night, something about just feeling the smallness of the night sky. And Maria makes fun of me even now because I will sort of pay attention to a book if the cover.
You're drawn to covers.
Yeah, and she'll say, "Oh, of course you do. It's got stars on it, or a picture, or a painting, or whatever that's there."
That's good.
You also talk about in the book going as I did all the time. I didn't stay there overnight, but I would go during the day to Gethsemane Abbey,
right,
and walk around because you have the church very quiet. You also have those hills all around it. And you talk about in the book being there and about your song, The Silence of God, coming out of that. A lot of people have really identified with that song, The Silence of God. Can you tell us about sort of how that came about and what that was like?
I was, it was that season I was talking about when we were on the road and our marriage had some hard stuff in it. And I didn't know what to do. I was pretty angry with God, but in a way that was more about like, I wanted him to explain himself to me. It wasn't that I didn't believe in him. I just wanted I wanted, a courtroom drama kind of thing. It's so silly when I look back on it, but that's how I really felt. And so a friend of mine suggested that I go to this monastery in Kentucky, which, I grew up very much, Protestant evangelical in the South. So like Catholic stuff was very foreign to me. So I was like, what do I do? What do I do at a monastery? And he was like, just go give him your name. They'll let you stay for the weekend, whatever. And so, and he told me to give them his name because his name was on the reservation. And so I got to lie to monks, which was super thrilling for this pastor's kid. But anyway, I went and spent 3 days fasting and praying and kind of really hoping that if I was a good enough boy that God would condescend to answer my demands, Yeah. And which again, it makes a lot of sense when I look back. Like I was, the cool thing is like, I know he wasn't mad at me for that. I think that he kind of like when you see your kid say, I'm going to run away from home. It's like, cool, I'll be here when you get back. I feel like he was just kind of letting me throw my fit and he was patient with me in a way that I'm very grateful for. But at the end of my more or less fruitless 3 days in the monastery, where I just was kind of kept butting up against this maddening silence, I ended up spotting a footpath that led into the woods in those hills. And that footpath led me to a statue of Jesus there was something about it. And it was one of the wonderful things about art is that there was, the artist was able to convey something that I had never really experienced before about Jesus's forsakenness and his agony in the garden. And I don't know, I knew in a way that I'd never known before that he was with me in the silence. And I think the quote in the book is that I knew him better in the silence than I ever had in the song. That there was an intimacy in that solitude that I wouldn't trade for anything.
You mentioned being a good enough boy. And that's interesting to me because, and I've mentioned this here before, I'm wondering why this is. 10 years ago, if I was talking to a, say, 22, 23-year-old Christian guy or girl, usually the problem would be people who sort of presumed on the grace of God. I prayed a prayer. God understands. He's good with me. I'm going to try to be the prodigal and the brother at home at the same time. Now, I very rarely find that. And when I'm talking to Christian students somewhere that I'm teaching or what have you, almost always, if you really get deep enough, they feel like God is mad at them, that God's angry at them. And they know Romans 3 and 4 and 5. They know all of that, but they feel like that's the case. I mean, one kid even said to me, young man, said to me, I know I'm not somebody who thinks you ought to just put your finger down in the Bible, but every time I open my Bible, it's to a passage of judgment. And I feel like God's saying something to me. I said, give me your Bible. I opened it up. I said, it just naturally opens to Ezekiel or Jeremiah. You're going to have some judgment passages in there. But I think that there are a lot of people for whom that is the case. Why do you think that is?
Man, I don't know. For me, it was because I think I grew up in the cultural Christian South. And it was like, and I never want to like throw shade on my mom and dad. Like they were great. They loved Jesus. And I know that they believed in his love and taught it to me, but there was something in the water that, and maybe it's just me, maybe it's just, this is how we're wired, but I just missed it. I just missed the real centrality of the person of Christ and the fact that he was tender with me. And so I don't know why that is. I know for me it was because I had a guilty conscience. I knew I was a sinner. I knew I constantly did and still do things that I wish I didn't do. And the turning point for me was the music of Rich Mullins, and I think the turning point for him was the writings of Brennan Manning, and so there was that. Like I found the Ragamuffin Gospel because of Rich Mullins, and that was the beginning of this realization that Jesus's love was stronger than anything. And so I kind of had this realization when I was 19 or 20, right around that time. Like that began to unfold to me how marvelous the good news really was. And that's why I do what I do. Like a lot of it is because I'm like, man, if I grew up in a church, I'm a pastor's kid, memorizing Bible verses and going to VBS and church camp and everything, and I still missed it. Yeah. There must be tons of other people out there who don't believe that God loves them. And I think I say in the book, like the thesis statement of every concert I do is, I want people to know Jesus is God and that he loves them. Like that's what I hope they take away. And obviously some kind of longing to be with him, to see him. And so, yeah, I can't explain why that is. I know for me, it was just because I knew I was a stinker. I was a pastor's kid, and I look back with such, I still struggle with it, but just real shame about who I was and what drove me. Back in the day.
Was shame that you were bearing then, or shame that you have now when you look back?
I think I feel embarrassed. It's not shame as much as I look back and I'm like, wow, the thing is, I've moved into a place where, we're always growing. I'm sure I'm thinking a lot of things wrong now, but I really do now a lot of times just walk around in like a kind of dazed wonder that Jesus loves me. Yeah. Like it's a good place to be. Yeah. I can't believe it sometimes. And I like we're doing the Christmas tour right now. And after a year of not getting to do it, I forgot how much I love telling people this story, until we got on the road. And I was just talking to my counselor an hour or two ago. He was asking about that Buechner quote. The place God calls you to is a place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And he was like, where do you find your deep gladness on the Christmas tour? And I had to think about it. I was like, where? Let me think. Because I do a lot of kind of whinging about the fact that I got to be home, like we're out there not just because it is fun, but it's a very intentional tour. Like, after 22 years, like there's got to be more to it than just, wow, music is neat. And so for me, it took me a while to get to the bottom of it, but I was like, the moment that I really feel, deep gladness, it's when I'm singing one of those songs and I look out and I see somebody else in the audience receiving the love of Jesus. I see their eyes are closed and they're singing along, and there's something about this this night that is helping them to believe that unbelievable thing, that Jesus sees them and knows them and completely loves them. Yeah. And when I see that and I'm telling them that, it bounces back on me, and all of a sudden I can believe it a little easier too.
Do you think, because I'm thinking about people who are listening to this or watching this, who maybe are stopping to think, where's my area of deep gladness? Do you think that sometimes even the places where you find that, what Buechner would call deep gladness, that you kind of lose sight of it. I know I do, where I have to remind myself sometimes that this is the point of deep gladness because there are all these other things that are going on around it. They're easy to pay attention to.
Right.
And sort of lose focus of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, man. I'm sure it's like you. Like I had to really. It took me about 30 minutes to get to that. I was like, where is it? I mean, I know where I'm supposed to find my deep gladness. Yeah. Like I can feel a lot of oughtness to it. But it took me a while to be like, oh, that's right. There is a moment that makes me get a lump in my throat, which is again another Buechner thing. Is like pay attention to the things that
pay attention to the tears. Yeah,
and so I would. I mean, I'm curious. Where is that for you? Like, do you find in the middle of the chaos there's a thing that makes you?
Yeah, but it takes me digging around in it too. And I mean, Maria, my wife, pointed out. There was a day I was in the middle of traveling somewhere and I had to travel somewhere else and then I had to do something else and I had to call somebody, I had to do all of this. And I just was kind of venting on the phone to her. And I said, people think I'm a robot. I can't do all of these things. Mm-hmm. And she said, I just want to remind you that 6 months ago, you said that you were toxic and radioactive and no one would ever want to be seen with you again. So kind of buck it up and see. But it does, I think, sort of the incidental things for most people can just it's easy for them to become the focus and you just lose that.
Yep. For sure. And that's how it is for me. And Jamie's like Maria. She reminds me, you asked for this,
Yeah.
And it's true. Like, I mean, when I was 19, I said, Lord, will you let me sing about you and write about you? And so whenever it gets crazy, I'm like, I have to, you go back to your first love and you give thanks. And then, sure enough, there's plenty of trail magic along the way. Remember, we've talked about trail magic, that whole idea that when you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, people will hide water in places.
Yeah.
Because when you can't take another step and you're out of water, you'll find this little package. And I feel like that happens a lot. And that's for
Russ
me.
Ramsey was talking about that one
Russ was
time.
talking about that.
He was finding all of these things along the way.
Yeah. And I think about that when I'm on the road, that I'll get a text from a friend at just the right time. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I don't know what to say to people out there other than I'm really thankful for, the tour is 22 years old now. And there have been plenty of opportunities for us to quit along the way. But now it's become a kind of liturgy, like where after this long, like there are things about the show. Like it happened the other night. We always close the show with, "O come all ye faithful," followed by a scripture reading. And I say, "This is the word of the Lord." And they say, "Thanks be to God." And we sing the doxology and then we walk off the stage. Mm-hmm. I mean, thousands of shows, the same thing. Mm-hmm. And there's something so comforting about knowing that that's what we're about to do with the same group of friends, more or less. And so the long obedience in the same direction, I think is possibly the best answer to that question. Like you're not going to feel deep gladness all the time. Yeah. But if you're engaged in that kind of a liturgy, it's kind of like your friend who said, "Why don't you just keep coming to church, even if you don't believe in God, and we will be patient with you." And I think he's been that way with me.
You were just talking about Jamie saying you signed up for this, and immediately, but Maria said something similar. But sometimes what I'll think is 19-year-old Russell Moore signed up for a lot of things that sort of set the trajectory of my life. And I wouldn't trust my 19-year-old kids to form an entire life plan for me. But this guy did.
Yeah.
And 19-year-old Andrew Peterson made a lot of decisions that led you to where you are right now. What advice would you give to 19-year-old Andrew Peterson?
I would say, once again, to quote my buddy Russ Ramsey, don't forget that you've only ever had one provider. I think a lot of the decisions 19 years, I said yes to too many things. I think at the beginning of a music career, you've got to just agree to whatever because it's the only way to do it. But I think my new favorite hobby is saying no to things. I'm learning to do that. And I realized that a lot of the situations I got in were because I was scared to death, that I wasn't going to be able to take care of my family, or that I was going to like be irrelevant. You know, there was ambition mixed in with a lot of it. And I think I would have just told him, hey, you know, it's, you don't have anything to prove. And also you're going to be okay. You know, you don't have to be so scared all the time. And I think that would have shaped, I wouldn't have gotten myself into some situations that I may have gotten myself into. Yeah. I wouldn't have burnt out, I don't think, as much. I remember Eugene Peterson, I heard him interviewed right before he died, and somebody said, do you have any regrets? And he said, more vacation.
Yeah, like he regretted taking the more vacation?
Sorry, his regret was that he didn't take more vacation.
Yeah.
And as a pastor, I was like, oh man, I was a pastor's kid. I was like, oh yeah, that we didn't ever do that, you know, as a kid. And so making more room for Sabbath, and because it's an exercise in faith. If you're self-employed, every time you take a break, you're having to trust, you know.
Well, and Peterson, you know, in The Pastor, he writes about when his elders said, take a time away, take a Sabbath. And he came to the elders meeting, and I was really struck that one of them was hurt and said, don't you trust us?
Wow.
And he realized that a lot of that was sort of believing in his own indispensability.
Yes.
Which I know is the case often for me. If
me
I'm
too.
not doing it, it's not going to get done.
Right. Man, one of the best moments of my professional life was, I write about this in Adorning the Dark, but there was a night we were supposed to play the Ryman show several years ago, and the Christmas tour. And, you know, there's a whole full band of these amazing people on that tour. Yeah. And I got sick the night before. I was throwing up, and I was just like, what are we going to do? How am I going to do the show? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the show would be completely fine if I wasn't there. I was like, so-and-so can sing that song, that guitar part, so-and-so can play. And man, I have never done the show with more freedom than I did the night that I knew that I was dispensable.
You know, one of the things that I notice about not just the Ryman show, but maybe the Ryman show as a metaphor for you, is that you are an introducer. There are so many people that I know because you've introduced me, or there's something else. And in the Ryman show, you'll have a lot of people who have been there all along, and Andy Gullahorn and Jill Phillips. And then you'll also have people that you're sort of introducing to the world. Is that strategic? Did you sort of at some point decide that, or did it just happen that way?
Well, it was because in the beginning, it was because I knew that I couldn't do the whole show by myself. I knew that I needed more voices in the room. And I thought the perfect answer will be to invite them to open, and then they'll be a part of the band in the second half. But over the years, I kind of began to realize that that first half of the show, where I get to introduce the audience to all these singer-songwriters that are in our community here, it felt like a cool way of pushing back at this, like, you know, some people think that Christian music is only what they hear on K-Love. And I always want to be like, actually, no, there are a whole lot of believers that are making another kind of art that is what David Wilcox calls medicinal music.
I've never heard that. Medicinal
it's kind of like a way of, so in my mind, it was kind of like letting the audience eat their vegetables. It was kind of like, we're not just going to feed you something that's obviously good for you. We're going to give you something that you're going to have to think about and help you see that there's another way of thinking of another way of receiving the gospel than just worship music or whatever. And so I got really excited about the fact that I got our show was a chance to introduce this audience to a whole different way of doing this. That was in some ways like a voice in the wilderness in the Christian music landscape. And part of it is like coming up in that world, it was like there's so many amazing artists who were, you know, had this deep faith that were working their tails off and, you know, playing for small rooms and doing this thing. And I just was like, if there's any way to, like, I know that I've received a lot of help from those folks. And so if I can turn it around and let this show be a show where we celebrate that kind of stuff, then that's what it grew into.
You know, if we look out the window where we're sitting right now, there's a garden. There's an arch that you built out of stones. And you talk about in this book, The God of the Garden, about gardening as being important for you, and important. You're commending gardening or the equivalent of it to other people. Why?
Wow, there's a lot of ways to answer that. The first thing that pops into my head is that I have learned a lot about Jesus through the process of getting closer to his creation. And I've said this before, but the ancient Christians, one of the things they used to say is that there's two books of Revelation. There's the book of Scripture and there's the book of nature. And so the way I usually put it is that if you want to know what God is like, you read your Bible, but also look at the world he made. And Jesus lived close to the earth, and almost all of his parables involve agrarian themes, And so we live in this little narrow window of time in history when most of us, at least in the American West, are pretty cut off from eating anything that we grow ourselves, or really being engaged with how to grow stuff, how to take care of the land. And so I know that when I was beginning to read more Wendellberry, I remember doing a thing with him and Norman Wurzba, and they talked about, I remember it was striking, Norman Wurzba, who's a guy at, I think, Duke, he was talking about how next time you read your Bible, pay attention to how many times there are agrarian metaphors. And so that was the beginning of this little light bulb coming on for me, living out here in the country where we live. And I started trying to pay more attention to what God might be saying to me through the way I was growing things. And so everything from beekeeping to like pruning the grapevines made me think about Jesus' teaching about pruning and abiding in him, to the fact that, a lot of time I spend in the garden, I'm kneeling. I'm actually like in a posture of humility and worship. So I pray almost the whole time. There's an ongoing conversation when I'm out there. Usually I'm asking God why there are weeds. I'm upset about that. But it has the taking care of the land and 2020 in particular, when I had a whole year to really,
because of COVID and
I was home. I was stuck at home from the road, so I had a whole year to like really pay attention and try to like take care of the place. And I realized that not only was the land flourishing, but I was flourishing too. That there was this, I felt like there were echoes of Eden that I was experiencing in a way that I'd never experienced before. And so, I just think that, and especially if you live in, if you have a job that involves a lot of cerebral screen time, thinking kind of stuff that you like, it's just crucial that you find a way to incorporate in your life practices that get you in connection with the given world. Because it's one of the loudest sermons that God preaches to us. I was just telling somebody the other day, I love the fact that at the beginning of lockdown, one of the top Google searches was, "Why are the birds so loud?" That it still makes me laugh. The people really thought that like COVID had for some reason like raised the volume of the birds, but no, a lot of the noise had gone away. So you saw
that these Gen Zers did with the birds aren't real.
Yes, it's insane. And I love the fact that they finally had to be like, we were just kidding.
We were kidding. That's right.
Just in case.
That kind of proved our point.
Crazy people started believing them, which probably would have happened. Right. Probably did actually. But anyway, that's my thing, is like finding a practice in your life that has you in contact with creation is kind of a way of allowing yourself to hear the birds that are always there. And
what about the guy who's listening, who's works on Wall Street in New York City, or is a church planner in Midtown Chicago or something like that? How do they do that when you're in the middle of a city? Yeah,
it's probably actually easier in a city than it is in a soulless subdivision like the one that you live in, Russell. Just kidding. No, but the city is wonderful. Like most good cities have some of the best parks, learn the names of the trees on your street. Buy a bird book, you can go birding in any, it's just a matter of learning to see. you could sketch. I've started sketching, and I see trees completely differently whenever I'm in a mode where I'm doing a lot of tree drawing. And so there are ways to put small things in your life that train you to see.
You know, we have a mutual friend who was telling us one time about serving on staff with John Stott. Mm-hmm. And that how intimidating it is to preach for John Stott. Obviously, it would have to be.
Yeah.
And said, but the only time that Stott was sort of came up and rebuked him was because he said seagull. And he said, there's no such thing as a seagull. That's a generic category, because Stott was a bird watcher.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think a lot of people know that. This brilliant exegete, pastor, leader was...
Yeah.
Probably for that reason.
Probably so. Yeah. I would he probably just followed his nose. Like, he was probably fascinated when he was a kid, and he just like never let go of that thing. And I think that like letting your whim kind of lead you to the thing is a good move there.
Yeah.
And it, you don't have to learn how to, grow a cottage garden. Like, it's little things, it's just paying attention to the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, So pay attention to it, listen to it. And I think that you'll be surprised. It changes the way you read the Bible. I know that, and I'm reading Ezekiel right now, and I've been underlining the in the beginning of Ezekiel, the very few encouraging bits, because there's a whole lot of judgment and warning and stuff that's happening. But almost every time,
beginning and the end, there's
almost every time that there's a little gleam of hope, it's tied to some garden imagery. It's like there's some but I will plant you in a good place, or I will whatever. So and that's just because I've been paying attention to growing things and how crucial that is.
Tell folks how they can learn about the Rabbit Room.
Yeah, go to rabbitroom.com and poke around, and ideally become a member. The Rabbit Room membership is what keeps the gas in the engine, and our mission statement is that, let me think if I can remember it, the Rabbit Room cultivates and curates story, art, and music to nourish Christ-centered communities for the life of the world. And so we are publishing books, putting on conferences, because we believe that this is one of the ways that God nourishes his people, and that his people are are one of the ways that the world comes to know him.
Well, thanks for doing this, AP.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much.
I know that you're in the middle of a bunch of things, and so thanks for taking
It's been so good to talk to you.
You have been listening to The Russell Moore Show. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you leave a review, it helps us get the word out to other people. If you're listening on a smartphone, you can tap the cover art and you'll find the show notes with some resources, including how you can get a copy of this book, The God of the Garden. And while you're there, check out Christianity Today, founded by Billy Graham, advancing this cause of beautiful orthodoxy all around the world. And you can become a member there. This is Russell Moore, and you're listening to the Christianity Today Public Theology Project's Russell Moore Show.
The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. Eric Petrick is our Chief Creative Officer. Russell Moore is the Executive Producer and Host. Mike Cosper is our Director of Podcasts. Production assistance by Core Media. Beth Gravencourt serves as Coordinator. Kevin Duthu, Producer. Audio mixing on today's episode by Kevin Duthu. Our theme song is Dusty Delta Day by Lennon Hutton. Administration for Christianity Today by Christine Kolb and Pam Vodanova. If you like what you heard on today's episode, make sure you subscribe to catch the upcoming episodes.